The material analysis report is 4 pages long. Every page reaches the same conclusion. Unknown. Not unidentified. Not pending further analysis. Unknown. As in, we have tested this against every catalog substance on Earth, and it does not match any of them. As in, whatever this object is made of, it was not made from anything that comes from here. The object in question is a receiver, a radio receiver. Standard dimensions, standard configuration, designed to pick up broadcast frequencies and convert them into sound. Except for the material it is made from, it looks exactly like something an engineer would build in 1969. The circuitry is Soviet. The housing design is Soviet. The solder joints are Soviet. Every component that can be identified is identified. Every component except the core. The piece at the center of the device that actually does the receiving. The part that touches the signal before it becomes sound. That part is made of something that does not exist. I have been inside this archive for 6 weeks. I came here because of a name. Nikolai Chesnov. He was my professor at the Moscow Institute of Communications Engineering in 1987. He taught antenna theory, propagation, the mathematics of how signals travel through space, and how you build something to catch them. He was brilliant, and he was strange, and in 1989 he stopped coming to work. His apartment was empty. His colleagues said he had taken a research position elsewhere. No one knew where. No one asked too hard. Last year, going through my mother's things after her death, I found a letter from Chesnov to her, dated October 1989. The letter is 3 pages of technical notes followed by 1 paragraph of something else entirely. He writes,
"If your son is still working in signals research, tell him to look for the torn antenna file. Tell him I did not disappear. Tell him I was taken somewhere to continue working on something I cannot name in a letter. Tell him the receiver works. Tell him I don't know yet what it is receiving."
My mother never told me. She kept the letter for 30 years and never said a word. In those days, secrets were impossible to keep. Every letter was opened. Every phone call was monitored. The state saw everything. Today, you have a choice. NordVPN encrypts your internet traffic and keeps your identity hidden from anyone trying to watch. If you want to protect yourself online, check the link in the pinned comment for an exclusive deal. I found the file 8 weeks ago. I have been inside it ever since. This is the archive of Object TA1 and the research program designated Torn Antenna, a signals intelligence investigation conducted between 1969 and 1989 at Installation Volga 7, Chelyabinsk Oblast. The investigation into a receiver that should not work, made of a material that should not exist, picking up something that should not be there. The official record is 7 pages, dated January 1990.
Object TA1 recovered June 1969 from crash site near Kishtim, Chelyabinsk Oblast. Preliminary assessment: foreign intelligence equipment of unknown manufacture, transferred to Installation Volga 7 for technical analysis. Analysis inconclusive. Object placed in long-term storage, pending technological advancement sufficient for complete material identification. Program suspended December 1989. Object status classified. Location undisclosed.
foreign intelligence equipment. That phrase is doing a great deal of work in a very small space. Foreign could mean American. Foreign could mean Chinese. Foreign could mean something with no country attached to it at all. The report does not clarify. The report was written to not clarify. But there is a second version of this document, filed the same day, same classification number, different content entirely.
Object DA1, recovered June 1969. Material composition analysis. Negative match against all known terrestrial substances. Object is not of human manufacture. Object demonstrates active signal reception properties that persist without power source. Recommend maximum classification. Recommend transfer to Special Technical Directorate. Recommend program continuation under new designation.
2 documents. Same date. One says foreign intelligence equipment. One says not of human manufacture. Both filed by the same office. One of them reached the public summary. One of them was buried for 20 years. I want to tell you that finding the second document was a surprise. It was not. By the time I found it, I had already read enough of this archive to know that the real story was always in the document that took the most work to find. June 1969. A truck driver named Yuri Pavlov was making a delivery run on the highway outside Kishtim when he saw something in a field. He described it later to investigators as looking like a piece of machinery that had fallen from a great height. Scattered across approximately 40 meters. Metal fragments, or something that looked like metal. Melted and twisted, but with one piece still largely intact. The intact piece was roughly the size and shape of a suitcase radio receiver. He reported it because Soviet citizens who found unexplained objects in fields were expected to report them, because not reporting them had consequences. The military investigation team arrived within 24 hours. Their field report describes the debris field in detail. Most of it was unrecoverable, fused to the ground, or shattered beyond handling. But the intact piece, the receiver-shaped object, was in surprisingly good condition. No heat damage, no impact deformation. As if whatever collision or event had scattered everything else had left this one object untouched. The field commander's report contains a detail that was underlined in red ink by whoever reviewed it in Moscow.
The object is warm, not hot, warm. Approximately the temperature of a human hand. Despite lying in a field in June, exposed to direct sunlight for unknown hours, the object's surface temperature is uniform and constant at 37 degrees Celsius. This is independent of ambient conditions. We sheltered the object in a shaded vehicle for 2 hours and measured temperature again. Unchanged, 37 degrees. The object is maintaining its own temperature.
37 degrees, the temperature of a living human body. The object was transported to Installation Volga 7. The installation was an existing signals intelligence facility, chosen for its equipment and its isolation. The technical team assigned to analyze it was led by senior engineer Vasily Naumov. Naumov spent the first 3 weeks simply observing. He did not disassemble. He did not test. He sat with the object, documented its physical properties, and wrote reports that are models of careful scientific language pushed to its absolute limit.
October 3rd, 1969. Object T. A1 surface composition resists all standard analytical methods. spectroscopic analysis returns no identifiable signature. X-ray imaging shows internal structure inconsistent with any known manufacturing process. The internal components appear to be grown rather than constructed. They have the branching recursive geometry of biological structures. Dendrites, root systems, vascular networks. But they are not biological. They do not respond to chemical markers for organic compounds. Whatever they are made of, it is not carbon-based. It is not silicon-based. I have tested every basis I have equipment to test. They are made of something I have no basis for. October 17th, 1969. I made an error today, a useful error. I was using a standard frequency generator to test the object's response to electromagnetic radiation, and I accidentally left the generator running at 8.3 megahertz while I left the room for lunch. When I returned, the object was producing sound. A low tone, steady, approximately 200 hertz, coming from the object itself without any connected speaker or transducer. I turned off the frequency generator. The tone continued for 11 seconds, then stopped. I stood in the room for a long time after that. I do not know what I'm dealing with.
End of Part 2. Naumov's journal entry from November 2nd, 1969.
November 2nd, 1969. I have confirmed that object TA1 is a receiver. It receives radio frequency signals and produces an acoustic output. It does this without any internal power source I can identify. It does this selectively. It does not respond to all frequencies, only to specific ones. The frequencies it responds to do not correspond to any standard broadcast band. They are not Soviet military frequencies. They are not NATO frequencies. They are not frequencies I can find in any allocation table anywhere. Something is broadcasting on frequencies that do not officially exist, and this object was built to listen to them.
By December 1969, Naumov had established the basic operational parameters. The object responded to a cluster of frequencies in a range that had no designation in any international catalog. The signals it was receiving were weak, intermittent, and followed no pattern he could identify. The acoustic output was tonal, not voice, not music, not code in any sense he could decode. Just tones. Complex tones with rich harmonic structures that changed slowly over time, like something breathing through a long note. I want to stay here for a moment with that description. Something breathing through a long note. Naumov was an engineer. He did not use poetic language easily or often. His reports are full of measurements and observations, stripped of anything resembling metaphor. So when he reaches for that image, it is because nothing more precise was available. Because that is genuinely what it sounded like. Not a transmission in any sense he recognized. Not signal and carrier and modulation and the clean vocabulary of communications engineering. Something organic. Something that had the rhythm of a living process, slow and enormous, like listening to the breathing of something so large that each breath takes minutes. I keep thinking about what it meant that no one else was listening. That this object had been in a field in the Chelyabinsk Oblast, broadcasting tones on frequencies that no human instrument was built to receive, and nothing was hearing it. And then Yuri Pavlov stopped his truck and wrote a report, and it was transported to a laboratory, and Naumov turned on his frequency generator by accident and left the room for lunch. The chain of accidents that led to anyone hearing it at all. How easily it could have gone unheard. How long it might have continued, broadcasting into silence, patient, undiminished, if no one had ever accidentally tuned to its frequency. He requested a second engineer. The request was approved, and a woman named Dr. Sofia Kovalenko arrived in January 1970. She was a physicist specializing in materials science. She had been told only that there was an unidentified object requiring materials analysis. Her first report, written after 2 weeks with the object, is the longest document in the early archive. The materials scientist filed his report in late 1970. His conclusions were extraordinary.
I have examined object TA1 using every analytical instrument available at this installation, and several I requisitioned specifically for this purpose. I want to document my findings completely and without qualification, because I believe incomplete documentation of this object would be a serious error. The object is composed of at minimum 3 distinct material types, none of which I can identify. The outer housing has the appearance of a metal alloy but responds to analysis as if it were both metallic and crystalline simultaneously, occupying 2 structural states that should be mutually exclusive. The internal branching structures respond to light in ways that suggest they are photonic in nature, channeling and processing light frequencies as well as electromagnetic ones. And there is a third substance at the very center of the device that I have been unable to characterize at all. It does not reflect electromagnetic radiation. It does not absorb it. It does something I do not have a word for. I have been a materials scientist for 15 years. I have analyzed substances from meteorites, from deep oceanic trenches, from the extreme conditions of nuclear test sites. I have never encountered anything like this. The object was not made by people. I am stating this as a scientific conclusion, not a speculation. This object came from somewhere else, but I know it was built for a purpose, and that purpose appears to be listening.
The object was built for a purpose, and that purpose appears to be listening. I want to stop here, because this is the point where I thought I understood the story. A device of unknown origin, recovered from a crash site, built to receive signals on frequencies that don't officially exist. An alien receiver, if you will allow that word. Strange, certainly. Terrifying in its implications, but contained. An object, a thing to be studied. Something that existed outside of us, that we could look at from a safe distance and try to understand. I was wrong about the distance. The distance was never there. It never existed. From the moment Naumov first heard the object produce sound in that empty room in 1969, the distance was already closing. Not because the object was dangerous in any conventional sense, not because it did anything to the researchers against their will, but because that is what listening does. When you listen carefully enough, for long enough, to something that is trying to communicate, the boundary between you and the thing you are listening to becomes permeable. You do not just receive the signal. You begin to resonate with it. You begin to change at the frequency of what you are hearing. Naumov knew this. Kovalenko knew it. Chesnov knew it. They documented it carefully and honestly in their personal logs, while the official reports described healthy, productive personnel, and they kept working, and they did not stop because the alternative was to stop listening. And by the time you have heard something that carries meaning at that level, the alternative to continuing to hear it is a kind of deafness that feels worse than whatever the hearing costs you. 1971. The program expanded. More engineers, more physicists, more equipment. Installation Volga 7 was rebuilt around the object. New laboratory spaces, new shielding, new monitoring systems. The Soviet state had decided that Object TA-1 was a priority. And in March of that year, the object changed. It had been receiving intermittently since its discovery. Hours of silence broken by hours of tonal output. The tones always in that uncharacterized frequency range. Always complex. Always following no pattern Naumov could identify. And then in March 1971, the pattern changed. Naumov's log, March 14, 1971.
At 3:22 hours, the object began producing a new type of output. Not the complex tones we have been documenting. Something simpler, rhythmic, 2 tones alternating, regular interval, repeating. It lasted 47 minutes. Then it stopped. I do not know what changed. I do not know if something changed in the incoming signal or in the object itself. But the output was different. It was structured differently. It felt intentional in a way the previous tones did not. I have been listening to this object for 18 months. I know how it sounds when it is receiving. This sounded like it was also transmitting.
Transmitting. The receiver was transmitting. Dr. Kovalenko confirmed it. The object had begun emitting on the same frequency band it received. Something in the signal it was receiving had triggered a response. The object was answering. What followed over the next 6 months is the most carefully documented section of the archive, and also the most disturbing. Because the exchange, if that is what it was not random. It evolved. The incoming signals changed after the object responded. Then the object's responses changed. Then the incoming signals changed again. A conversation. A slow, tonal, incomprehensible conversation conducted across whatever distance separated the object from whatever was sending. And the researchers could hear all of it. Dr. Kovalenko, personal log, September 1971.
I have been listening to the object's output for 8 months now. I want to document something I have been reluctant to write down. The tones have started to carry meaning, not meaning I can decode or translate, not linguistic meaning, but meaning the way music carries meaning, in the way a minor key carries sadness without specifying what you are sad about. I hear the object and I understand something. I cannot tell you what. But I understand it the way you understand the mood of a room when you walk in. The object means something, and I am starting to hear what it means.
She was not the only one. Naumov reported similar experiences in October. 2 other engineers submitted formal observations that carefully avoided the word meaning, but described in the technical language an increasing sense of comprehension when in the presence of the object's output. A sense that the tones were not just sounds, but statements. The Oversight Committee sent an evaluator in November 1971, a psychologist named Dr. Anatoly Baranov. His assessment of the research team was filed under a different classification and took me 2 additional weeks to find.
All 4 primary research personnel demonstrate signs of prolonged acoustic influence. Symptoms include heightened sensitivity to tonal frequencies, reported episodes of comprehension without linguistic content, difficulty distinguishing internally generated thoughts from externally perceived information. Most significantly, all 4 subjects, when asked independently to describe what they believe the object is communicating, produce descriptions that are statistically too similar to be coincidental. They are not using the same words, but they are describing the same thing. I cannot determine the source or mechanism. I can only determine that 4 isolated individuals are receiving the same non-linguistic content, and that content is coming from the object. I recommend immediate removal of all personnel and suspension of close proximity research.
The recommendation was rejected. The program was considered too valuable to suspend. 1972 through 1978. The archive for these years is dense, technical, and increasingly strange. The exchange between the object and whatever it was communicating with continued and deepened. The tones became more complex. The researchers' reports became harder to follow, written in language that reached for things language was not built to carry. Reading through 6 years of documentation is its own strange experience. You can see the researchers changing across the pages. Their early reports have the clean confidence of people who believe that, with enough instruments and enough time, everything can be measured and understood. Their later reports have something different, not less confident, more honest. They stopped writing around the edges of what they were experiencing and started writing directly at it, even when the direct description strained the limits of what technical language could hold. They became, over those 6 years, people who had heard something they could not unhear, something that had rearranged their understanding of what was there to be understood. I recognize this process. I am inside it myself, right now, 6 weeks into this archive. I can feel what they were describing. The accumulation. The gradual shift in what seems important and what seems peripheral. The sense that you have been walking past a door your whole life without noticing it. And now you have noticed it, and now you cannot stop noticing it, and it is opening. The second dual document appears in this period. A formal progress report submitted in 1975 by the installation director states,
research personnel remain in good health and full cognitive function. Program proceeding productively.
The personnel medical records from the same period, filed separately, show 4 researchers treated for sleep disorders, 2 for what the medical staff called dissociative episodes, and 1 hospitalized briefly for what was described as an acute crisis of self-identity. She recovered and returned to work. She requested to return to work. She said the object needed her there. The object needed her there. 1979. Naumov made a decision that is documented only in his personal log, which survived because he hid it inside the technical documentation where no one thought to look. He had been with the object for 10 years. He had listened to its exchanges for 10 years, and he had reached a conclusion. He wrote,
I know what it is communicating. I have known for some time. I did not write it down, because writing it down meant committing to it, meant being the kind of person who writes this kind of thing down in a scientific log. But I have decided that documentation is more important than my reputation or my career or anything else. The object is not receiving signals from somewhere else. The object is receiving signals from something that is here, has always been here. Something that exists in this space, in this world, in this air, that we cannot perceive with any instrument we have ever built, because we have never built an instrument made of the right material. The object is not pointing outward into space. The object is pointing inward, into the layer of reality that exists beneath the one we can measure. Something lives in that layer. Something has always been there, and it has been trying to communicate with us for a very long time. I do not know who built the object. I do not know how it came to be in that field, but I know what it does. It translates. It makes the inaudible audible. It has been doing this for 10 years in a room in Chelyabinsk Oblast, and 4 human beings have been sitting in that room listening, and we have heard things that I do not have words for. And the things we have heard have changed us, and I am not sorry. I only wish we had found it sooner.
1980 through 1989. New researchers rotated through. Some lasted months, some lasted years. All of them reported the same gradual shift. Confusion, followed by something that felt like clarity. The sense of meaning accumulating. The tones becoming comprehensible in ways that could not be articulated. Personnel medical records show consistent patterns. Sleep changes, sensory sensitivity, what the psychologists called expanded associative thinking. No one's health broke down. No one became non-functional, they just became different. Quieter, more attentive, more difficult to manage. In 1985, a new engineer arrived. His name appears in the personnel files. Nikolai Chestnov, my professor. He was 34 years old. His early reports are methodical, careful, the work of someone trained to document precisely. But by 1987, the reports have changed. Not in quality, in depth. He is writing things that go beyond what was asked of him, reaching into territory that is harder to classify. He wrote,
"There is a quality to the object's current output that I want to try to describe. Even knowing the description will be inadequate. It is like being in a room with someone who is trying to tell you something very important in a language you do not speak. You cannot understand the words, but you understand the urgency. You understand that what they are trying to say matters. And you understand gradually that they have been trying to say it for a very long time. That they have been waiting for someone in this room to be capable of hearing it. And I think we are close. I think we are almost at the point where the gap between what the object is transmitting and what human cognition can receive becomes small enough to cross. I think we are almost able to understand, and I find I'm not frightened by that. I find I'm only impatient."
His last report before his disappearance is dated October 1989. It is one paragraph.
"The object spoke to me directly last night. I do not mean this metaphorically. I mean that for approximately 4 minutes, the tonal output resolved into something I understood completely and without ambiguity. I understood it the way I understand my own thoughts, as if there was no gap, no translation, no distance between the source and the receiver. I know what it has been trying to say. I know what it needs. I cannot write it here, not because I am forbidden, but because the writing would not carry it. Some things cannot travel through language. They can only travel through direct experience. Through the right kind of listening, I am requesting authorization to continue work under new protocols. I believe we are at the threshold. I believe the communication can be completed. I only need more time.
He was not given more time. The program was suspended in December 1989. Object TA-1 was placed in classified storage. Installation Volga 7 was repurposed. The personnel were dispersed. And Chesnov wrote a letter to my mother, telling her that he had been taken somewhere to continue working, that he did not disappear, that he was taken. Taken, not reassigned, not transferred, taken. The third document that should not exist is filed at the very end of the archive. It is dated March 1990, 3 months after the program was officially suspended. It is a maintenance log for Installation Volga 7, which had been repurposed as a storage facility by that point. Routine, unremarkable, except for one entry.
March 14th, 1990. Object T. A. 1 storage room. Annual inspection. Object in place. Object producing acoustic output. Tones consistent with previous documentation. No power source connected. No personnel assigned to program. Object operating independently. No action taken pending guidance from oversight. Guidance not received as of filing date.
The program had been suspended for 3 months. No one was in the room. No power was connected. And the object was still talking. Still receiving whatever it had always been receiving. Still answering. Still translating something that existed in the space below perception into sound that human ears could hear. In an empty room in Chelyabinsk Oblast, with no one there to listen. Or perhaps not quite no one. The maintenance log notes in the same entry one anomalous detail, written at the bottom by a different hand in smaller letters, as if added after the fact.
Temperature of object at inspection, 37 degrees Celsius. Unchanged from initial documentation, 1969. Also, the room did not feel empty.
21 years after Yuri Pavlov found it in a field outside Kishtim, the object was still warm. Still the temperature of a living human hand. Still there. Still waiting for whoever was next. I have the file in front of me. I have Chesnov's letter to my mother. I have 20 years of research documentation describing an object that should not exist, receiving signals that should not be there, carrying meaning that should not be accessible to human cognition. And I have one more thing. Something I found at the very bottom of the secondary archive, in a folder that had no label, filed out of sequence, marked only with a date. January 1990. It is a list of names. 47 names. Everyone who worked in close proximity to object TA-1 for more than 6 months between 1969 and 1989. Engineers, physicists, psychologists, maintenance staff. 47 names. I sat with this list for a long time before I counted the dates, before I understood what I was looking at. Because a list of names in an archive can mean many things. A personnel roster, an access log, a record of who was cleared for what classification. I read through it looking for Chesnov's name, found it near the bottom, and then started reading the whole list properly. 43 of them have a date next to them. The dates are between 1990 and 2003, distributed across 13 years, all of them after the program was suspended. I do not know what the dates signify. They could be transfer dates, retirement dates, reassignment dates. I do not know. I have not been able to cross-reference them with any other document in the archive because the dates appear in no other document I can find. They are annotations. Someone went through this list years after the program ended and added dates next to 43 names. Someone was tracking something. But 4 names on the list have no date. 4 names with nothing next to them. Open, unresolved. Vasily Naumov, Sofia Kovalenko, 2 others I do not recognize, and Nikolai Chesnov. He said he was taken somewhere to continue working. He said the receiver works. He said he doesn't know yet what it is receiving. The letter to my mother is dated October 1989, 35 years ago. He would be 73 years old now if he is alive, if wherever he was taken is a place where people stay alive. I have been sitting in this archive for 6 weeks. The ventilation hums. The fluorescent light is steady here, no flicker, just cold white light and the smell of old paper and something underneath it I cannot identify. Something almost mineral, almost electric. The smell of a room where instruments have been running for a long time. I notice, writing this, that the room does not feel empty. I have been alone in it for 6 weeks. I am certain I am alone. And yet, the tones from the object's output are documented throughout the archive. Naumov transcribed them into musical notation, imprecisely, acknowledging the notation could not capture what he was hearing. I read those transcriptions and they meant nothing to me. Marks on paper representing sounds I had never heard. But 3 days ago, I found the audio recordings. Reel-to-reel tapes stored in a sealed box in the back of the archive room, labeled only with dates. I have been listening to them in the evenings, after the work of reading is done. I understand why Chesnov could not write down what the object was saying. I understand why Naumov spent 10 years trying to find the language for it, and finally gave up. I understand why Kovalenko wrote about meaning that arrives before words. I have been listening for 3 evenings. Something is accumulating. Something is becoming clearer. Not in the way that you decode a message, in the way that you come to understand a person, gradually, inexorably, through prolonged proximity and attention. I am a signals researcher. I was trained by Nikolai Chesnov, who was taken somewhere in 1989 to continue this work. I know how receivers function. I know what it means to be tuned to a frequency. I know that the right instrument, built from the right material, can make audible what was always there, but previously could not be heard. I wonder, sometimes, if that is what Chesnov meant when he said the receiver works. Not the object, not object TA1, something else. Something about what happens to the people who spend enough time in its presence. Something about what the long proximity does. I wonder if we are the antenna. I wonder if we were always the antenna. And I wonder, listening to the tones in the evening in this quiet room, what exactly I am receiving. The file ends here. No further entries exist. The researcher's name was never recorded. Their fate remains unknown. Object TA1 was last documented in storage at Facility 19 in 1991. Its current location is classified.